Almost every part of this chair is based on a 400mm radius circle and I call these parts the ribs. The first step of the build was to cut over 80 curved ribs on the bandsaw. That's a lot of cutting, so I'm only going to show you me cutting number 1. Here I'm gluing the first 3 ribs together. They include a support section or stand to hold the chair upright during the build. I made a left and right-handed jig to cut the taper on the bottom of each rib. The jig holds the ribs vertical while pushing the bottom of the rib out 30mm for a 6-degree taper. This is by far my most complicated build to date and includes a lot of interesting design or build solutions. I call this jig the Orb flag. It not only keeps the ribs in orbit around the centre of the base, but it also holds them in place during glue up. Here I'm attaching a magnet to the top of the rib with tape. While the bottom of the rib is held in a recess, the top of the rib locks onto another magnet on the Orb flag. Now the rib is held in place by magnets. I tap in a small nail to stop the rib sliding around during clamp up. I stick on wedge-shaped offcuts with double-sided tape so the clamps have parallel surfaces to grip. This gets harder as each rib and wedge is added because the angle increases. I don't show it here, but the nails are removed after the glue dries. I'm not sure, but this could be the most unusual chair build you will ever see on YouTube. You might be asking yourself, how do I turn all of these curved pieces of timber into a chair? Well, at this stage of the build, I was asking myself the same question. Then I realised I don't have a plan to follow, and the Orb chair wasn't designed. It was more imagined. I knew the ribs alone wouldn't be very structural, so I glued wedges or spaces between them. Each wedge has a curved base and is tapered. Not only tapered from top to bottom, but they're also tapered from front to back. In total, there were 28 wedges, and they became a very attractive and important theme throughout the build. I've had to come up with a different way to clamp the ribs on as I come around in the arc. To start with, I drilled a few 19mm holes in a board, which was then screwed to the bench top. Then I dropped a screw clamp in the hole and tightened it against the rib. The advantage of these clamps is they spin in the board to match the angle of the rib. Using the 3 screw clamps also created a lot of pressure, so the chair was screwed to the bench top to stop it moving. Here's another example of using rubber bands as clamps, and how my camera doesn't always handle vibration very well. Rubber bands were so effective clamping multiple curved and wedge-shaped components together in this chair, and the unclamp was just so easy. I'm at a really interesting part of the design or build because I'm designing it as I build it. Well, some components as I build it. And I've come across 21 ribs, and they actually make up the main back section that you'll lean against. Then I need to step down to the armrest level, which is about that high. So what I'm doing is I'm making up these really unusually shaped spaces out of red cedar, and the top line, as you can see here, I have a piece of fishing line. I'm going to cut them through, but I'm not sold on what shape the bottom of these should be. I'm toying with something like that. If you thought the backrest wedges looked complicated, you were right. But these drop-down wedges were on a whole new level of complexity. They were hard to design, difficult to shape, and very tricky to clamp in place. I have to admit, parts of the Orb Chair Build kept me awake at night, imagining solutions to problems like, well, for example, this clamp up. It might look awkward, but this was the easiest way to sand all of the end grain at the top of the chair. The three centre ribs are parallel. They don't splay out from the centre of the chair. They also go from the top at the back here all the way through to under your knees. And I did that for strength and also to give myself something to build on or build off with the angled splayed ribs after that point. But I only had ply spaces in here temporarily. So now I've made up two cedar, Australian red cedar, spaces that are a little bit longer as a feature, and they have a curve on the bottom, like a 1/2 inch round bullnose. I used a number of clamp setups to hold the ribs in place. The simplest way in the end was to tap a wedge in between a clamp and the rib itself. I set the armrest height on the flag and transferred the mark onto each rib in order to cut them off. All of the gaps in the seat are filled in with wedges. Later on, I curve the front edge over for comfort. Alright, I have just added the last two cedar packers or spaces between ribs coming down to the seat section of the chair. There's one here and one there. They're shaped a little like these ones. They drop down or cascade down as they reduce in size. And it's just about done. That is the base structure of the chair. And the next thing is to add the trim, like the armrest, the trim that goes up the side, from the armrest to the headrest, and then put the headrest on. It's looking fantastic. It's been a crazy journey. I mean, this is so complicated. So many angles, so many bits of timber. Every project has to be approved by Lola the workshop dog. Here, I'm trying to convince Lola that I'm making a chair. After filling the rebate in the drop-down trim with epoxy, I carefully slipped it over the end of the ribs and the wedges. Now I can move on to the headrest. At this stage, I still don't have a clear picture of how the finished chair will look, apart from the overall 80cm orb shape. Positioning the chair upside down allowed me to fill the headrest rebate with slow setting epoxy. This created an epoxy pond, which stopped the epoxy from dripping out when I clamped it up. It's not very often I point this out, but check out the one-handedness improvisation going on here. Each armrest is made up of two parts. The bottom part includes a rebate to strengthen the ribs which don't have wedges between them. I used deep pour epoxy for this glue up, even though the rebate was only 12mm or ½ inch deep. After cutting the temporary legs off, I moved on to making the upholstery inserts. I needed a curved board for the backrest, which will be padded and covered with an olive-coloured crushed velvet. I didn't have 8 hours to travel to Nick Bedula's workshop and back to use his vacuum bag, so I just tried clamping them together from the edge to make them bend into each other, and to my surprise, it worked really well. I trenched out the top layer of the armrest to take an upholstered insert. I added T-nuts into the padded insert board, then ran bolts through both layers of the armrest to hold them in place. I have to admit, making a very complicated project without a plan or design could have been an epic fail. The build took months to complete and really tested my patience and imagination. That said, the journey was enjoyable and I've added another beautiful piece of functional art to my home. Just like the chair, the base was designed as I built it, and the curved risers are the offcuts from between the ribs. Originally, this base was only ever going to be temporary for the video, but everyone who visited the workshop during the build loved it so much, I think it's going to stay. I'm not sure if I love the base, so let me know in the comments if you like the base or if you don't like the base. While Jo, my wife, sanded the base, I lacquered the chair. Then it was just a matter of painting parts of the base black and taking pictures of the finished product. Which leads me to, have you ever seen a chair built like this before? Check.